Right, everyone. I'm hoping everyone can hear us. Do a little show of hands. Right, fantastic. Thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations for making it to what's clearly going to be the hot ticket of the whole event, this session. The first thing you probably see is that I'm not Nicky Roach. So I will confirm that you are in absolutely the right space. You're on the citizen infrastructure stage, and you are here to hear about how we're going to strengthen flood resilience through collaboration in the UK. Nicky is very sorry that she can't be here to chair this panel, as indeed am I, having heard Nicky on numerous occasions, and what a wonderful convener, leader, and speaker she is. For those of you that don't know, past president of SciWem, and she now has set up and leads her own podcast, Planet Positive, which gives fantastic insights into a whole range of different people with different perspectives, all trying to do good things in the name of the environment and society. So if there's one thing I'd ask you to take away, please, for Nicky, it's check out Planet Positive, her podcast. They've just won, I think, at the NYC Podcast Awards, the People's Choice Award for Best Science Podcast. So there we go. Right. So I've told you who I'm not. Who am I? My name is Charlie Stratford, and I work at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I've been there for 25 years, and for much of that time, on the research side, investigating wetlands, wetland hydrology, wetland hydroecology. So how do those parts of the natural environment respond to the sorts of pressures that we put on them? And indeed, how can we make them and support them in providing part of those nature-based solutions that we're also keen on seeing? I lead now our partnerships business development team, and that is all about joining the dots between the research community and the rest of the world who are out there trying to apply the knowledge and the experience and the expertise to actually make a real difference. Okay, just before I introduce our panelists, I just wanted to say a couple of things, because of course it won't have escaped anyone that we're here in the middle of a very, very rare red heat warning, 35 degrees predicted today. A warmer climate means a more active atmosphere, one that is much more capable of evaporating and storing water, and then as conditions change, releasing that water in quantities and at rates onto the land surface in ways that we simply haven't seen in the past. To make it even worse, it falls on a landscape that's been desiccated by that heat, and that desiccation means that the slow flow of that water through the landscape doesn't happen. It runs straight off the surface, it runs through our catchments, across our farmland, and through our towns, cities, on its way back out to the ocean. So there's quite a challenge there. I won't read my next slide, which was going to tell you just how many pounds and lives and what have you are affected, because I'm sure you can each see those numbers almost on a daily basis in different parts of the media. Needless to say, it's a very, very considerable challenge, and one that's getting worse. So with my esteemed panelists here today, we're going to be talking about why flood resilience matters, how different sectors experience that risk, why collaboration is so essential if we're going to make progress in addressing this challenge, and what we need to do to get there. So I'm joined by Jonathan Glerum, who is Head of Environmental Outcomes at Anglian Water, more than 2 decades of experience in flood risk management and environmental resilience. Antonia Doncila, who is Sustainability Manager for Climate and Nature at Openreach, and involved in innovative work using fiber networks as environmental sensors, and Keith Davey, who brings extensive experience both from his ongoing roles at the Environment Agency, but also having been formative in setting up the Air Resilience Company, which focuses particularly on creating spaces where organizations can collaborate around shared risks and developing solutions. So panelists, if I can start with Jonathan, could ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about the sense from your organization's point of view, why the risk of flooding is so relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. So I'm Jonathan Durham. So I've worked at Anglian Water now for pushing 50 years. Before that, I was at an organisation called Syria. And I joined Angling Water to lead our strategic flood risk management work. So my kind of remit is a bit broader than that now, but I suppose my heart is in flood risk and flood risk management. And I suppose it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we cover, so for those of you who don't know Angling Water, we cover the east of England, from sort of the Humber to the Thames, and from Lowestoft in the east across to Leicestershire in the west. So we're the biggest water company in England geographically, so with about 7 million customers. But we also sit in the driest part of the region. So you think, well, flood risk, what's the challenge with flood risk if you sit in the driest part of the region? But what you were just saying, Charlie, a second ago about particularly these summer storms are a huge challenge for us. Not least because, particularly in urban environments, generally the only place for that water to go is into the sewer system. Now, if you have a perfectly designed sewer system with lovely separate fouled surface water sewers, then generally you don't tend to have too many problems, except when you get the really intense storms, because those systems will have a particular kind of design standard, and you'll always find the storm that will beat that. So, but increasingly, and again, you touched on the press, you will have seen in the press the kind of challenges that the industry has got at the moment, particularly around storm overflows, and the, I suppose, increasing awareness of the impact that we have on the environment, particularly from discharges when there is too much rainfall that finds its way into our system. And I think we'll come on to this later around the kind of interconnectedness of different things. But when I think about flood risk, I think about the impact clearly on our customers, but I think about the impact on the environment as well at the same time. So particularly from if that rainwater is mixing with untreated water, then that's going to find its way out into the environment. So there are a whole kind of range of challenges that we're kind of facing into, and not least, I mean, I touched on with the kind of driest part of the region, but a changing climate is having a huge impact on how we operate the business on a daily basis now. So, and we are seeing, our kind of operational centre opening up kind of incident rooms on a more regular basis, whether it's too much rain, too little rain, it's too hot, it's too cold, all sorts of reasons. So, we are leaning into this on a daily basis, and I suppose this is where we are trying to invest our customers' money to ensure that we become a more resilient business with leaning into the kind of challenge that we have with climate change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. And I expect, again, many of the problems that you allude to, again, haven't been far from some of the front pages of the newspapers over the last few years. And I'm sure
it's definitely not
cause you the odd headache. Antonio, if I could come to you. So same question, if you're happy to introduce yourself and tell us from your organisation's point of view the importance of flood risk and why we need to be looking at those solutions.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I represent Openreach as a sustainability manager for climate and nature. For those of you who might not know, Openreach is a subsidiary of BT Group. But what we do is we're a company of engineers, thousands and thousands of engineers that build and maintain the largest broadband network across UK. So we build and maintain this network from cities to villages to the hyper remote areas across Scottish Isles and nature reserves and wetlands and everywhere. And why this is important? Well, you've probably noticed nowadays you can work from home, you can access your banking online, you can access your GP records online, you can do a lot of things because the systems that make our society work, they have digitalized. And this is really, really important. It's a key lever for decarbonization of UK as a whole, of the world as a whole, is making our lives easier. It's preventing commuting trips, and it's leading to dematerialization. So it's inherent to the way we live today. But in enabling all this, what happens is we have to build and look after a network of millions and millions of kilometers of cables, of fiber optic cables, of copper cables, millions of telegraph poles, millions of equipment, bits of equipment, and really complex electronics, some of them that are situated out there exposed in the open, and all this infrastructure, it is exposed to the weather and to the increasing risks of climate change. One way to mitigate against this is we are building fiber optics. So for a really long time, you might remember the way communications were happening was through copper cables, and copper and water, they don't really go well together. So especially in the context of flooding, that was a big risk. We're seeing a very high rate of faults whenever there was any event that led to water ending up in our copper cables, in our electronics. So now we're moving to fiber optic. Fiber optic it's incredible because, first of all, it can meet the demands, the data demands of today, tomorrow, and so on, the ever growing data demands. But it's also it's glass, and it's inert to water. It requires light rather than electricity to transmit data. So in the face of increasing risks like flooding, we see fiber acts and responds much better, leads to a lower fault rate. Overall, the fault rate we see in our fiber optic network is 60% lower than compared to the copper. But even fiber itself is not infallible. As I said, we still rely on telegraph poles, on overhead cables, and we are very much at the mercy of the elements around us. So when there's flooding happening, there's third-party damage. There's trees falling down, which can impact our assets. There's, as Jonathan was saying, there's a lot of runoff and overflow and contaminated water that affects our electronics, and until that water is cleared out with specialist intervention, you end up at the risk of basically having our engineers sit around and wait for sometimes even a couple of weeks at a time for this water to be cleared out, flood water, to then intervene and repair the network, because people tend to need communications, especially in critical moments like when there's an incident happen like flooding. That's when you might need to call the police, emergency services, your family, and that's when the risk of losing connectivity is higher.
Antonia, thank you. Yeah, and yes, what a concern. You're faced by a flood and you find you can't contact anyone to ask for help about it. Yeah. Keith, last but no means least, please, if you could tell us about your experience at the agency and setting up the resilience company. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. So I'm here with two hats on. I work for the Environment Agency, so we are the lead flood risk management agency within England for flooding. So we have a very strong interest in flood risk. And my two colleagues here have articulated extremely well why flooding matters. But I'm not directly involved in flood risk management at the Environment Agency, so I sit on our national funding team. I might wonder what the hell that's got to do with flooding, but what we do is collaborate with others and find innovative ways of funding and financing climate resilience. So I've been very involved in setting up the Air Resilience Company. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the River Aire, it's the principal river that flows through Leeds. It rises in the Yorkshire Dales. Leeds got very, very badly hit by Storm Eva on Boxing Day 2015. And that had a £500 million impact on the Leeds economy. Fortunately, it happened on Boxing Day, so no one was around. There was no loss of life. So, be thankful for your small mercies. And something needs to change. We cannot carry on with business as usual. So Leeds City Council has delivered the Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme, and that protects the city from another storm like what happened in 2015. But we need to increase resilience, and to do that, you need to roll out natural flood management in the upper catchments. And The difficulty then is one, paying for that, which is relatively cheap, but maintaining it for the long term over the next 40, 50, 60 years. So what we've done is set up a partnership between public, third, and private sectors, whereby we collaborate. We've created this community interest company. It's the first in the country that we're aware of. And we sell to the private sector resilience. Because this is part about Leeds being a thriving place. It's a place where companies can thrive, the economy grows, and communities and people and wildlife are protected. So this is a really, really interesting new model. So companies pay an annual subscription and they get a reduced flood risk. It's a problem gone away for them, something they don't have to really think about, and it's a cheap and affordable option. So we're dead excited about it. And it benefits the likes of water companies. It benefits the likes of Openreach. Because our message is you do not have to be flooded to be affected by flooding. We're all interdependent on this, and we're all operators who run a flood system. So there is a need for this collaboration and coming together to actually provide that resilience.
Keith, thank you very much. And just before we move into the next question, how fantastic to have a panel with such complementary and yet contrasting perspectives on this issue. And I think as we move forward through the discussion, we're going to get some continued fantastic insights. What I'd really like now is some thoughts and reflections from each of you as to where do you look to see best practice? Do you have something in your minds that you look at with a sense of envy or what have you, if only we could have that here? And I suppose I'm thinking of things that are, actually exist at the moment that we could aspire to. And maybe, your thoughts on how could we get there? Why aren't we there at the moment? So I don't know if anyone wishes to start particularly on that one. I'm very happy to go down the line again, but if you'd rather mix it up, that's fine. Yep, Jonathan.
Yeah,
cool.
I'll make a start of that. So, and just before I do, just to add to what Keith was saying. So we are involved in a community interest company in Norfolk. The funds basically coastal erosion improvements or kind of beach nourishment improvements because it protects our asset. So we have a number of pumping stations very close to the coast there. And instead of building a permanent, big sea wall, for example, they do beach nourishment instead. So they replenish sand on the beach to protect the land, basically. So, and that protects our asset from flooding. It protects our asset from coastal erosion. And therefore we benefit from that in the way exactly that you were describing. So, a perfect example. Really.
I'll take a joint first with you then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yours might be the first river one, maybe. So there you go. So in terms, best practice. So, I mean, and I'm sure the others will back me up on this. One of the biggest challenges that we have in the UK is just how fragmented we have kind of organically made the kind of world of flood risk and flood risk management. So there are so many different actors, organisations involved, and I think it goes to your point, Keith, as well. That your community interest company is a combination of public, private, third sector, everybody, because we have to, right? And we have to bring that together. And there is some fabulous kind of sort of best practice happening across the country where different organisations are coming together, often despite of the kind of challenges, the kind of organisational kind of challenges of doing stuff rather than because of. So, and a really good example of that. So in Norfolk, we had some terrible winter flooding that just went on for months and months and months for a number of years back. And off the back of that, the Norfolk Strategic Flooding Alliance was set up. So that involves, I think there's about 35 different stakeholders involved in that partnership. And that ranges from the obvious ones being the Environment Agency, the county council, the district councils, ourselves, and so forth, internal drainage boards. But then you've got so many others. So you might need to bring in kind of highways, you might need to bring in power and telecoms and so forth. And all these people that need to be involved in kind of managing flood risk. And that in itself is a really, really difficult thing to do, is to kind of manage a partnership of that size successfully that then kind of delivers on the ground. So to support that partnership, we've actually seconded somebody in because we see the benefit of it. And actually, whilst it is a big partnership, you've often got a small core of partners that will drive the work forward, and then others will kind of come in when needed. So, and obviously we see ourselves as one of those kind of core partners to kind of drive that stuff forward. So, but I do think it sometimes, it is, despite the challenges that we've got in terms of the legislation and setup and so forth, a number of different actors. I kind of, sometimes I look overseas and try and see what's going on there. I don't think there's any kind of silver bullet or a kind of magic way of doing it, if I'm honest. So whilst, our system may be a little bit flawed, what it does do is it does drive greater collaboration, I think, because you need all those different organizations together. And it says on the title of our the session here around, doing more through collaboration, and, ensuring that we've got those kind of different stakeholders represented around the room, around the table is absolutely essential. It's not easy at all. It's really, really difficult to do that and to do it successfully. But you get a much better outcome at the end of the day if you've got that buy-in than if it's just a few of you kind of working in isolation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Very well made point. I can't help myself but ask a very short supplementary question, because I think that, setting up and maintaining partnerships, and it may well be a supplementary question that you all want to chip in on at the point, but maintaining those partnerships and keeping that involvement strikes me, from my own experience, as a very difficult thing to do. I guess what you're saying is having a smaller number of organizations who lead the charge then sort of means it's slightly less overwhelming or what have you for others to join. Would that be right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm involved in multiple partnership projects, whatever you want to call them, and they all have a similar kind of approach to that, in a way that you do have a small core that will drive stuff forward. You do need to, I think, I'd love to come on to this in a bit more detail later, but I think kind of working in partnership, there is definitely a mindset to that. And not everybody or not every organization will have that mindset that thinks we can do more in collaboration. And I see it across my organization. There are people who, I've got people in my team who just love it. They just want to work with others all the time. And then I've got other colleagues just, it's not my wheelhouse. I'm doing my own things. And there is definitely that kind of mindset that, it is different to kind of really, to successfully work in collaboration. It is different to just normal day-to-day working, for sure. So, but yeah, having that core, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So, Antonio, if I could come to you, and again, on this best practice. So from your perspective, I guess from telecoms, but again, the world you see more widely, what things strike you as being the exemplars of best practice?
Very much collaboration across sectors is at the heart of it, because as I was saying earlier, everything is becoming digitalized. Everything is relying on power. All the systems are intrinsically connected, much like we see in nature. You don't have nature and climate; they're very much two very connected systems. So we can't really operate in our silos. We learn so much, and we embed it in our practice from working with others. We have regular monthly meetings with the Environment Agency, with Keith's colleagues at the Environment Agency, looking at ways to align our current efforts to build full fiber broadband, because that's still ongoing, with the flood alleviation schemes, making sure that the infrastructure we're yet to deploy is aligned with those schemes, and therefore it's like reinforce the benefit of those schemes, while also understanding how best to utilize the knowledge and the really high quality data within the Environment Agency and apply that to our operational readiness. We do stress testing scenarios. So we had like a flooding desktop exercise with the Environment Agency focused on the River Thames, and understanding if 1 in 100 years flood were to occur, or 1 in 25 years flood were to occur, all these different scenarios across Oxford, Guildford, Staines, what our assets will look like in terms of physical damage, how long that damage will occur, in the days leading up to the event, what does our process say we need to do, how do we collaborate with others as part of the local resilience forum, really what our vulnerability points as part of the current business continuity processes that we have, and where we can improve these going forward, as well as gaining that understanding that through flood alleviation schemes, you end up saving millions and millions of pounds in operational costs, not to mention preventing that erosion of customer trust, which we're yet to be able to quantify, because every time an event happens, be it extreme heat, extreme cold, flooding, storms, and connectivity goes down when people need it the most, they start getting frustrated, and for the right reasons. And once that happens once or twice or three times, it's something very difficult for us to manage going forward in the relationship with the end customer. So we start getting that appreciation internally that data is incredibly is incredibly useful to inform future action, to inform our operational readiness, what more we need to do, because we're constantly reevaluating the processes we have, the emergency processes that we have. And similarly, we collaborate with other utility providers. As part of our parent company, BT Group, we've collaborated with Anglian Water and with the UK Power Networks as part of Credo, the climate resilience demonstrator, which was which was aimed at building a digital twin of all of our networks and interlining this information with forecasts of flooding across UK, across different scenarios, climate change scenarios. And understanding how the different networks across utilities, how they interact, depend on each other, where there are the critical nodes where we need to intervene together to increase the resilience across these systems, and understanding better the readiness that we have today and how we need to improve it. Equally, in Scotland, we're part of the Climate Resilience Infrastructure Scotland Forum, which brings together utility providers, Scottish Water, SSEN, National Rail, and we were working to understand these cascading impacts due to the interdependencies across utilities, looking at how multiple hazards and the risks from multiple hazards compound. So what happens if you have flooding happening at the same time as a cold spell or a storm, and how the impacts amplify, and how they cascade, and mapping exactly what happens, and then how, if there's any regional variability. For example, like in Scotland, in the, I think, eastern side, you don't need you rely on gravity pumping, so you don't really as a water company rely on electricity as much as you do on the west, and then because electricity is highly dependent on telecommunications, and that kind of the loop of interdependency between water, electricity, and telecoms varies regionally. And understanding that sometimes we have different risks depending on the region, and that requires different approaches of collaboration. It is incredibly useful, because one size does not match all.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and as you started, of course, building on the collaboration point, and then with that collaboration comes the being able to incorporate those different technical needs and the employment of technologies such as digital twins or what have you to help us try and understand and answer those questions. So, Keith, to you, best practice from your work.
I think this is all a very, very new way of working an area. So I'd probably go for good practice. I think there's a lot of really good examples. There's shed loads going on across the country. But I think for me, the main thing is that recognizing that this is a whole economy issue. We've just heard about how it impacts on telecommunications, water, the interdependencies, but also stretches out far, far wider. This is a whole economy thing. This is a societal thing. People can't get insurance. Companies are paying higher insurance premiums. Potentially, you could get areas where mortgages won't be offered. People can't remortgage their homes. They become mortgage prisoners. They can't move. They can't sell. You get disinvestments. road networks go down, telecommunications go down. That means retailers, they can't take payments, people can't access cash, they can't do banking. It's absolutely, flooding is a whole economy approach, and it needs to be seen as such. And I'm not quite sure we've got there yet. That's my personal view. So it's not just an environmental thing, it's a social question, it's an economic question, it's a security question. I rest my case. Look what's just happened. So best practice is all sectors coming together in a shared sense of purpose and recognizing that there are those interdependencies, and we have to collaborate and work together and finance it together. It's not for the private sector, it's not for the public sector, it's not for the third sector to raise those funds. But if we work together on this and find shared solutions, and importantly, share the economic costs and benefits of it, if we reduce flooding for the Environment Agency, that's a win. That's a smaller demand on the public purse. So we all as taxpayers win. It's a win for the utility companies. They can maybe invest that money elsewhere, into better technology. We all benefit. To my mind, that's what best practice means.
Thank you very much, Keith. And we're going to expand on that a bit now. But just before I do that, I'd like to give a sort of a 10-minute warning to our audience to say, start thinking up your questions. We're going to be coming to you, and it's your opportunity to fire your questions at the panel. So we're going to hear from the panel once more now, and then it'll be over to you. And so building on those interdependencies, for each of you in your sectors, where are those independencies that you're aware of? But also importantly, what more do we need to see around, where are there more connections, more overlaps that actually we want to see more of to be able to address these issues, in the holistic way that we're discussing? Jonathan?
Thank you. So you mentioned the Credo project, which I think is a fantastic example. So, and you mentioned, so it was ourselves, wasn't it? BT Group and UK Power Networks, and thinking about the kind of challenges of kind of flooding and heat and others too, particularly to the kind of our assets and what happens if the power goes down. What's the impact on our assets? What's the impact on equally what happens if telecoms goes down and so forth. So that's a fantastic project, and it was basically as a digital twin that kind of looked at, you could look at cascading effects, and if something went down, what the impact of that would be, and that's brilliant. And I think this goes to some of the points that were made earlier around. So from our perspective, we will look at the kind of risk both to our assets of flooding. So invariably, a lot of our assets are very close to water for obvious reasons. So then invariably they are generally at high risk. So we look at that risk to assets, but also we have to look at the risk from our assets as well, which is maybe slightly different than maybe what you might have to look at, for example. So we will look at across both of those, and equally you could have one and the same. So if one of our assets gets flooded, that could have a knock-on impact on our customers, and they are flooding because of that flooding, if that makes sense. So there's constant kind of interdependencies and so forth going on across the system. So it is challenging, and you'll know this better than most. It's huge amounts of kind of modelling to try and understand, where the kind of risks are and how do we mitigate those risks and all those sorts of things. So which is obviously essential. The other thing I wanted to raise though, which I think is really important, is often we'll often think of flooding as a problem, right? And we'll think of it as something, flood water, we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and rightly so in the moment, right? Particularly if someone's house is flooded or infrastructure is flooded, we need to kind of manage that and deal with that as quickly as we can. But the point I wanted to make was actually, we are in a situation now, particularly in the east of England, where and day like today will really hammering home this point, is that the I suppose economic sector of the East of England, very driven by agriculture. They are desperate for rain and they are desperate for water. And so in the winter, we invariably have too much water, and we spend a lot of money either by the Environment Agency or internal drainage boards pumping that water out into the North Sea. And invariably in the summer, we are desperate to have that water back as quickly as possible. And just thinking about these interdependencies, I was on a call yesterday where we're really starting to think about what the economic opportunities are for the east of England if more water is available. Yeah. And that could be agriculture, but it could also be the tech sector, particularly thinking about data centers and the cooling requirements for water. They don't need clean water for that. Neither do farmers for irrigating their crops. So can we be capturing water, reusing that water? And the same can be said within kind of a kind of household perspective. Do we need to be flushing toilets with drinking water? I mean, the simple answer is no, of course we don't. So how can we be thinking differently about that and the kind of interconnect this across the whole water cycle and drawing all those lines together? So there's still a lot more work to be done in that space, and I'm really pleased that kind of we have to be at the forefront of some of that work, given that we are so dry in the east of England. But there's still a lot more to do.
Fantastic, yes, and as you say, very much. Speaking to the world in which I inhabit in terms of seeing that whole water cycle. Antonio, so from your point of view, those interconnectedness, I think you've alluded to some of them already, but perhaps expand on a few of those. And is there more out there that we could be joining up?
Yes, there's so much, and we really are living exciting times. One of the things that our new network, fiber broadband network, is doing is that it doesn't only just provide telecommunications capability, but it can also be used as a continuous, live, highly granular environmental monitoring system. And there's a talk at 3:00 on, I think, one of the other stages if you want to hear more about that. But fiber sensing in a nutshell, it can help not just us as telecoms, but all the other utility providers diagnose in real time any damages to the network. It can help them assess the evolution of natural events in real time, and therefore improve or adjust their response to them more effectively. We're successfully testing using our fiber optic cables to detect water leaks at the moment, so mains water leaks, which is kind of the topic of the 3:00 panel. But same technology and same approach can be applied to understanding the evolution of a flood event, and how this interacts and impacts the water table, and how this is impacted by the conditions of the soil, especially if you have a flood event after a prolonged drought, and there's like less porosity and less capability of the soil to absorb some of that water. So we can understand better the kind of event we're dealing with. And then we can come together across utilities and coordinate a response. So there's a lot of potential there. In order to enable this kind of collaborations, I think there's also opportunities for further alignment across the way different sectors are governed. We all have different regulator bodies that are dictating the ways in which the conditions in which we operate. So you have Ofgem for energy, Water, Ofcom for telecommunications. And the level of maturity of these bodies when it comes to climate resilience, regulatory support and funding for cross-sector collaboration in the resilience space and in managing climate risks is different. And we have been very pleasantly surprised by our colleagues across water and energy sectors to see that they have a lot more clear standards when it comes to doing a climate risk assessment, a climate scenario analysis, and how you report those results, so they're aligned across different companies so that everyone can bring the data together and get a big picture understanding. There's more funding on resilience opportunities, whereas we're still kind of finding our way. Ofcom, our regulator, they don't have climate resilience as part of their remit, and it's something that is recognized as part of the well adapted UK report, which has been released few weeks ago. It's the first time where it had a telecom section in it that's been recognized. Where the way we're set up today, we are exposed to the risk of flooding and storm, and this risk will only increase within the next few years as the effects of climate change intensify, and that Ofcom should extend its remit to climate resilience, so we can have agreement across these regulatory bodies in what good practice looks like, in what collaboration standards we should all adhere to. So when we come together to use solutions like fiber sensing, we all know how to make use of this data and how to prioritize where to act. And there's often times where the energy sector in an event, they're very clear where they need to repair first, to restore a service first. And sometimes that communication doesn't always get across to us. So if we do things in a more coordinated way, using data that everyone understands in the same language, the same standard of quality, then we can make the most of the innovations where we're currently seeing being developed.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm genuinely surprised and quite concerned to hear that our communications regulator doesn't currently have climate risk on their to-do list. I hope we could all take that away and encourage them to do so very soon. Keith, if I could come to you, I know we spoke a little bit before the session here about those interdependencies, and from your perspective across really a very broad range of stakeholders and how those different stakeholders interact and what those interdependencies look like, and indeed are there further interdependencies that need to be involved going forward?
Yes, there are. So I think we've heard very well articulated the interdependency between utility providers, and we can keep discussing that. But something we haven't mentioned is the interdependencies between rural and urban communities. So with the Air Resilience Company, what that money is doing and where it is going, it is going to farmers and landowners, and they will implement and host and maintain the natural flood management. Because what happens in the upper catchment impacts the rural urban communities downstream and the Leeds economy. And similarly, what happens in town affects what happens in rural communities, because they will rely on those urban centres to sell the products for processing, healthcare, get the kids to school, etc. So there was a very strong interdependency between rural and urban. So what we are doing is actually enabling flows of money from those urban areas, from those urban-based businesses through to rural communities. That gives them a longer-term, sustainable finance and funding mechanism to do those nature-based solutions. I think it's a brilliantly neat solution, and it brings the two together. So again, it's bringing those things together. It's a whole economy approach. And I just think it's fantastic. And obviously then the amenity value, the recreational value and standard of those rural areas is greatly improved. So day trippers, visitors, people in towns, cities, going out and enjoying places like the Urban Dales, Yorkshire Dales, Upper Air Catchment, places like that, they too will benefit in a very recreational, amenity-based way. Meanwhile, they get the increased climate resilience. Those rural communities, they get improved land use, improved land productivity, and a sustainable cash flow as well. So it's a brilliantly neat solution. So that interdependency between rural and urban is definitely something to bear in mind.
Thanks, Keith. I love that. And I love that we've heard interdependency defined in three different, but yet equally absolutely vital ways. And going forward, if we're going to achieve, addressing this huge challenge, it's going to require all of those. Right. So it's time to come to you, our audience. How does this work? Do we have a roving mic? Do we have that? No, we don't. Right. Well, in that case, I'm going to pretend to be Michael McIntyre. And unless this results in horrifying feedback, I'm going to come round to you and ask you to introduce yourselves and give us your question, please.
Great panel, guys. My name is John Myers. I work for Optimi doing culture change in the water industry. In the water industry, we are not seen as being very good people, unfortunately, at the moment. And it's a nice little window into what happens when cultural regression takes hold, which has happened for us in the water industry in the last 5 years. We've got 5 water companies: Thames Water, Severn Trent, not quite yet Anglian, Jonathan, so it'd be a nice chat. My question is about culture progress, which is arguably what we all want. And how do you create cultural progress in humans from the sustainability ticket, which we're all sitting on? And the last thing I'd say, Antonio, is we had 2 great people from Openreach in the water industry in the recent past. One was the chief exec of Severn Trent, the other was the chief exec of Thames. They were lovely people, but they didn't really yet bring the culture that we need. So my question is, how do we get cultural progress kicked off in the 180,000 people who work in the water industry?
Okay, fantastic. Nice, simple question there. Thanks, John. So here we go. Culture change. Jonathan, let's come to you first, but I think we want to hear perspectives from all the panelists on that culture piece.
John, thank you. This is where I wish one of my HR team was here with me to help answer this question. So, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think, what I see working in the industry, and hopefully you see this too, is that what you see reflected in the press is not the type of people that you see working for the companies, right? I've got colleagues, particularly our operational colleagues, they are so passionate about either our customers or the environment or both. And they work their absolute socks off to support both. And that is not reflected in what you see in the press. And of course it isn't, because that doesn't sell papers, right? Or get you clicks. So, I suppose the challenge we have as an industry is that, since COVID and since everybody wanted to be outside and swimming and so forth, is that we are, our name is mud now, right? And we've got a massive challenge to turn that around. And that is not going to happen overnight. There's no way that can happen. We lost that trust really, really quickly, and it's going to take time to build it back up again. So, and I think one of our biggest opportunities is actually the proof is in the pudding, right? We have got the biggest. I get asked this question a lot: is why do you work for a water company? Why would you want to work there anymore? And I say actually, I love where I work. I love it so much. So I work for Anglian Water and I live in the West Country. So I commute the whole length of the country to go to work because I love where I work. So, but our opportunity is in what we are doing now. We have the biggest investment program we have ever had. We have more money than we've ever had to do amazing things to support people and the environment. So why wouldn't we just crack on and do that? And we embed that in our culture in terms of this is what we are doing and this is how we are doing it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Antonio, if I could come to you. So on the culture piece.
The culture piece. Yeah. I have to be fully honest here. Every time when there's an extreme weather event happening, we are under a lot of stress. Our engineers are out there, they're deployed in advance. They're moving away from home for days. They're working in terrible conditions because it's always, either rainy or really hot, like 2 degrees hotter up a pole when it's already 40 degrees outside. We have very stringent health and safety rules we work by. Most of our engineers, unless you're part of the emergency response team, which is a highly qualified, highly trained team of engineers, you are not allowed to work near water. So in the context of if there's a flood, you rely on your emergency response team to carry the brunt of the work. So whenever there's an extreme weather event happening out there, part of me is, my heart goes to all of our engineers out there who have to deal with it. But I'm also a bit glad because it shows that we are no longer talking about long-term need for change. We are talking about things that are happening now. So we are forced to have a culture change. The way we try to frame the conversation around climate resilience and investing in climate resilience in Openreach is saying, the kind of events you see, they're not going to be different in the future. There's just going to be more of what you see today and more intense. So with a bit of push in trying to quantify the cost of these events in terms of human resource, in terms of OPEX, in terms of eroding that customer trust, we can then frame it as this is going to be the new norm. If you find this stressful, if you find this out of the ordinary, it's becoming the ordinary. Therefore, the culture has to change, and then there's less of a uphill battle, because all of a sudden people realize they are engineers, they work with the situation they're given, and when they understand this is not the outlier, the kind of discussions we have internally now, it's a lot easier to navigate when you bring up climate change is less of a 2050 and beyond problem. It's more of an operational reality.
Thank you very much. And Keith, fascinated to hear your insights here, given you're dealing with very different aspects of the communities and what have you from a cultural point of view.
Culturally, I mean, God, this is a massive question. You could write a thesis on it. But just from my perspective, culturally, I think the environmental sector, because I've spent a lot of years working with public sector organizations, wildlife trusts, rivers trusts, etc., we need to get more confident and comfortable with working with the private sector, because I think there is possibly a mutual suspicion, and we need to overcome that. So culturally, I think the environmental sector and I'm talking about public and third sectors here, we need to be comfortable and confident to work with the private sector.
Yeah.
We really do. And I think there's a long way to go, but that is beginning to shift. So I'm certainly keen to push those boundaries.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right. I think I saw another hand. Right. I'm afraid I'm already getting flagged from the back. So I think we've got time for one more question. Whilst I get that, panel, if you could also just get your thinking caps on for your punchy response to my magic wand, which I will be getting out in a second. So please, I know you, don't I? But for everyone else, please introduce yourself and question.
Hey. Hi, I'm Steve Kay. Spent a long time working in the water industry, now semi-retired. It's interesting, isn't it, that we've now, as a consequence of this bad image from water, etc., we've actually got the largest investment programs we've ever had, and I guess there'll be similar size investment programs in your world, Antonio, and other infrastructure companies. But I guess for me, there's a bigger strategic question about how do we actually manage water holistically, and how do we work truly as a catchment, working with farmers and city planners, etc. Because from what you've said, my worry is that we'll just carry on laying more pipes, building more concrete tanks, a bit of collaborations going on, but where's the strategy? Where's the actual investment in something? For me, it seems like a massive challenge.
Yeah. So, Steve, we haven't got time to cover this. I could spend another hour talking about this. But the one thing I do want to mention is, so many of you will be aware of a recent review into the water sector undertaken by Sir John Cunliffe. One of his recommendations was around regional systems planning. And often that kind of often referred to as like the missing middle, right? That kind of regional planning, either it's done at a very local level or it's done for a whole company level. And actually, the opportunity we have now is to start thinking much more kind of holistically at kind of catchments and multiple catchments to plan better. That opens up so many different avenues, not least the way that you fund work going forward. Because actually, if you can start kind of drawing together a whole jigsaw of kind of opportunities and plans, you can go to the private sector for funding. That it makes it much easier to do that than if than the way that we kind of currently do it. But it also kind of creates that kind of collaboration, forced kind of collaboration around what can we do, how can we do it, and it brings in both the urban, the rural, all of the other different kind of stakeholders that need to be involved as well. Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. Antonio. Did you want to answer? No?
I don't think I can add anything much on top
Anything on that one?
I'm going to skip this one because it's a good question. It's a Gordian knot, isn't it? It really is, but absolutely. catchment scale, multiple catchment scale, landscape scale thinking, systems thinking.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Audience, please, if you haven't had the opportunity to ask a question, grab our panelists afterwards. I know they're keen to sign autographs. They'll have lengthy conversations with you, etc. So please take that opportunity. I'm going to now finally put them on the spot and ask them to come with me on a brief flight of fancy where I become their fairy godmother and have my magic wand, and I can wave that and provide you with any one thing you want that would enable better flood resilience, and in whatever magical thing you want to achieve that into the future.
So I'm going to be a little bit flippant here, but anyone that's kind of heard people in the water sector talk about this before, just steady drizzle would be my magic wand, right? So, because not only does that reduce our risk of flooding, but it also helps in terms of the water resources side of thing as well. So often you'll hear people just say, look, just give me a steady drizzle. I can't think of anything worse personally, and I moved to the West Country, so it's more for me. But that's if I had a magic wand, that would solve a lot of our problems.
Okay, all right. I can't let you off the hook like that, though, can I?
No, you can't.
So something that might be more, I should have constrained my powers or my offer really as the fairy godmother. Something that I might be able to grant.
So I touched on this right at the beginning of the session, but I'd really like us not to be too siloed in our approach when we think about managing flood risk, because when we manage flood risk and when we're managing water in a catchment, sub-catchment, we can do so much more with that water. And I'm particularly thinking around the kind of challenges around CSOs. So that's too much water in the system, and CSOs are in place to stop people from flooding, right?
Yeah.
So if we start closing them off and do that, we're going to increase more flooding. So how do we kind of join that circle and make sure that we can just kind of, I suppose, be more holistic around our thought around how we manage water in a catchment and treat water as the resource that it is, no matter when it falls.
Fantastic. Thank you. Antonia, short of changing the weather.
I mean, we all hope for that, but no, it's catchment-based solution, nature-based solutions, working with nature instead of against it. If I could, I would make it mandatory reading for everyone, especially the kind of the senior leadership, the kind of all the regulatory bodies, everyone to read the report that was released by the UK government in January, looking at biodiversity loss and nature degradation as a risk to as a threat to national security, and confirming that all key critical ecosystems in UK are at the risk of collapse, which in turn affects national security. So if we can start taking nature serious and use it as the infrastructure that is at the base of everything we do, then I think we all stand a chance.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Keith?
I'm going to steal 2 points here. I think just when we're recruiting companies to sign up to the Air Resilience Company, we often got passed off to the sustainability officer. Often, no disrespect to them, they're too junior. You need to get up to C-suite and needs to be recognized as a risk management, not a sustainability issue. So that's a key thing. And people need to recognize, and it's not just the utility companies, it could be the large retailers, etc., hotel chains, whoever it may be, they are operators within a flood system, and they need to come to the party as well. And we'll get there.
Fantastic. Thank you. And that is us perfectly to time. So, audience, please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. Grab them after if you want to. And thank you very much for joining us for this fabulous session. Thank you. Goodbye.
One sec. Gonna give me
Thank you, everyone.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, great stuff. Well, it's like fast. Well, it's quite very small. Yeah, okay, exactly. Yes. Think about the land. Yeah, there are some. That's why I was thinking. They're just intrigued by, not a dull, good bunch of dulls. Genuinely, nothing. Final point. It's very opposite in terms of cost. Yeah, I think that's
potentially takes a disaster, realise that anyway, this is called. I'm the data boss chief in the fires company. That's the world. They're doing some